What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review MaXXXine, the third film in the horror trilogy directed by Ty West and starring Mia Goth. And initially, I'll go totally spoiler-free, but at a certain point, I will have to offer a few spoilers just to kind of underline what I'm trying to say, but I'll include a time code down below and a verbal warning when that time rolls around. But let's start with the easy stuff. MaXXXine was by far one of my most anticipated movies of the year. I really enjoyed X. I enjoyed Pearl less so. I'd say that MaXXXine somewhere right in the middle of those two for me. I think it's 2/3 of a good movie, 1/3 of a bad movie. But anytime you're expecting like one of the most kick-ass, kind of visceral, stylish, just stimulating movies of the year, and you don't get that experience, naturally it leads to feeling a little underwhelmed or a little disappointed. But I will say this: Mia Goth is fucking awesome. If anything, it's a great performance in search of a better movie which Ty West unfortunately does not provide as the writer and director. But the movie looks fucking gorgeous. I mean, the photography is absolutely stunning. They really capture that kind of sleazy side of LA in 1985. It just seems like the movie, while it's promising cocaine and porn stars and serial killers and religious fanatics and just all kinds of murder and mayhem and just pure carnality, it just came across around like the 2/3 mark. I was like, wait a second, is this movie kind of chickening out of its initial promise? Like, it feels a little tame. At times it even feels a little vanilla. And maybe this is going to make me sound like I'm totally sick and twisted, or maybe I've just seen too many thrillers and too many horror films, but I was just really hoping that this movie would go for the jugular. And it seems like at every turn, Ty West was kind of tapping the brakes, eager to avoid offending anybody. And I feel like if you're going to make a movie like MaXXXine, where you have XXX in the title, well, then you need to have the bravado and the courage of someone like Abel Ferrara or Brian De Palma or Ken Russell, or if you want to go super sleazy, someone like Lucio Fulci. And speaking of all those legendary directors, I recently made a video about my top 10 favorite erotic thrillers of the 1980s. I didn't really intend it to be like a warm-up for MaXXXine, but who knows? Maybe I spoiled myself by watching way too many classics and way too many masterpieces before watching this film MaXXXine, which does not measure up favorably compared to some of the movies on that top 10 list. But who knows? Your mileage may vary. Let me know what you think. I'll include a link to my top 10 favorite erotic thrillers of the 1980s down in the description below. But I will say this: I saw it with an absolutely sold-out screening up at the AMC at Lincoln Square up at 68th and Broadway. And I'd say maybe like 20 or 25 people in there were laughing and clapping and just having the time in their lives. And who knows, maybe they'd kind of decided to have a good time in advance as opposed to waiting for the movie to provide that good time. I've certainly been guilty of that behavior. But I also heard a few people snoring, and they would kind of snort and come to when something happened. I was like, all right, this movie's having a mixed response. And I think if the movie had been able to sustain the style and the tension and the dread and just kind of like, the mild titillation. I'd say this movie is mildly erotic, not overtly erotic. But if it had maintained the quality of the first 2/3, I would be reporting that this is a pretty cool movie, but just, keep your expectations modest. But tonally, the third act has a big switch, or kind of goes into almost kind of unintentional or tongue-in-cheek kind of campy humor, as opposed to delivering on all the dread and the suspense that's been kind of teed up and teased throughout the first 2/3. And I just found that really frustrating. I was really hoping this movie would go to the dark side and provide something shocking or something surprising. And I feel like the least interesting possible reveal at the end, or the least interesting twist that you could possibly imagine, that's where the movie decides to go. I'm like, really? That's where you decided to go? The most predictable route imaginable, without saying who is the killer or who are the killers, etc. Any character in the movie that's in the cast, apart from the actual killer, would have been a more interesting choice from my point of view. And maybe I'm a victim of just some false advertising, because people have been talking all summer about how this is going to be a slasher movie or a serial killer movie or an erotic thriller. And it's not really any of those. It's actually more of like just a showbiz drama where you got a little kind of murder going on in the background. But as far as the showbiz stuff is concerned, the way it depicts the adult entertainment industry or the strip clubs of LA, or people that are trying to get into cool, low-budget horror films, kind of climb that showbiz ladder, that's the best stuff in the movie. Like, Elizabeth Debicki is fucking awesome in this. She's playing a director who's finally gotten her big break. She's directed a hit horror film. She's making the sequel, and she's looking for an actress to really, spice things up a bit. And Elizabeth Debicki, she's so good in this, she'll make your head spin. But I think her character is by far the most interesting part of the movie, especially the way she describes all the battles she had to endure in order to get to this position where she now is, and how nothing's going to stand in her way as a filmmaker. And if an actor or an actress is working on her set, then they better get all their distractions out of the way, or they're going to get shit canned. They're going to get fired, because she's not going to put up with people being late or excuses or any of that. And the way she has like this almost like tyrannical purity of vision in terms of what she wants to achieve, I was like, if the character being played by Debicki had directed MaXXXine, it would be a much more interesting movie, which is a kind of a final irony that might be lost on Ty West, who obviously wrote the character, but he doesn't seem to have had the courage of his convictions, at least when it came to the final third of the film. But on the off chance you haven't seen the previous two movies, X and Pearl, here is the description for the film, ripped straight from the pages of Wikipedia. MaXXXine is a 2024 American slasher film written, directed, produced, and edited by Ty West. It is the third installment in the X film series and a direct sequel to X 2022. The film stars Mia Goth, who reprises her role as MaXXXine Minx, alongside Elizabeth Debicki, Moses Sumney, Michelle Monaghan, Bobby Cannavale, Halsey, Lily Collins, Giancarlo Esposito, and Kevin Bacon. In the film, MaXXXine sets out for fame and success in 1980s Hollywood while being targeted by a killer known as the Night Stalker. And that description more or less gets it done. And I should give a special shout out to Giancarlo Esposito. You can tell he's just having an absolute blast with the character that he's playing. He's playing kind of an agent, kind of a lawyer, kind of an all-around kind of fixer or hatchet man for his clients. And when called upon, he's more than happy to kind of go above and beyond the call of duty of a typical agent. Like most agents will say their role is to field offers and negotiate contracts. But his character goes all the way. And, he's very, very cool. Kevin Bacon plays a sleazy private eye or a private dick, and he's maybe hamming it up just a tad. Maybe he could have tapped the brakes a little bit in terms of just how cartoonish he is, but still, it is always fun seeing Kevin Bacon in anything. And he like Giancarlo Esposito seems to be having a ton of fun with the character. And ordinarily, while I'm a huge fan of Michelle Monaghan and Bobby Cannavale, I think their characters were a little underwritten, or tonally they kind of clash with the rest of the movie, and it's through those characters that we get some of the I don't even think they were unintentional comedic bits, but they are intentional comedic bits in the final third that just fall flat and just clash with the overall tone of the film. And so while I hate to speak ill of actors that I like, they're definitely at the root of some of my problems in the final third. But once again, Ty West, he wrote this, he directed it, he produced it, he edited it. Like, I think if anybody's going to accept the praise or the blame for the good and the bad in this movie, clearly it's going to be Ty West. And also, I have to add, I love the fact that A24 year after year after year shows this massive commitment to the horror genre. I mean, I feel like every year they have one or two kind of big plays in that space, and some of them pay off better than others. But some people like to say they make art house horror. Some people like to say they make elevated horror. I feel like for me, there's just one genre, and sometimes it feels more art house, sometimes it feels more elevated, sometimes it feels sleazy as fuck, sometimes it feels like toothless PG-13 nonsense made for teenagers. But it's all the horror genre, and it's a genre that I've been loving and adoring my entire life. I think the first one I ever saw was Poltergeist when I was 6, and it just absolutely fucked me up. Or maybe it was Ghost Story in the theater. Anyway, from the early 80s to the present day, I've been watching scary movies, and I think that will never change until my dying day. And the fact that A24, where they could just go the prestige route or the awards route and just try to do nothing but foreign films or moving character-driven dramas. I love that. I love the fact that they recognize there's a lot of money to be made in the horror genre, and it doesn't always have to be the lowest common denominator. Like, if you hire really cool, interesting filmmakers, they will take the genre to places that have never been before. I just think that of these three that A24 has made with Ty West, X is still the most exciting and the most interesting. So just as a way of wrapping up my non-spoiler section, what this movie reminds me of, it's like somebody serving you a steak where they forgot the sizzle or the sauce. Like, they forgot the grease, they forgot the flavor. Like, the nutrients are all there, and all the ingredients are there that you would want in a steak dinner, but they just forgot to give it that little extra something special that would have made it a movie like Ken Russell's Crimes of Passion. I feel like Crimes of Passion is a great comparison to this movie because it has a ton of overlap. Instead of a porn star, you have a hooker, but you still have somebody who's being potentially stalked by a total murderous sociopath while they do a little bit of sex work, and they also do a little bit of showbiz or have like a day job and that sort of thing. There's a ton of common ground between the two movies, but Crimes of Passion is fucking insane. Like, at each and every opportunity where Ken Russell had an opportunity to tap the brakes, he's like, you know what? I'm going to put my foot on the gas, and we're just going to go into delirious, insane, hallucinatory territory. And that's why 40 years later, people are still watching it and still talking about it. Or if you really wanted to go to the dark side and make a disturbing movie where people will be writing, articles like, how dare Ty West and A24 make such an offensive film? Like, you could have gone the Lucio Fulci route with a movie like The New York Ripper. I think The New York Ripper is one of those movies where it takes the story to places where I don't really want to go. Like, I like movies that have excessive nudity and violence and that sort of thing. But even for me, when I watch The New York Ripper, I'm like, all right, I'm tapping out. Like, this is too disturbing for me. Although I've seen that movie like 4 or 5 times, so obviously I'm not that disturbed. But MaXXXine definitely needed to be a movie like, in the context of the film, you have a lot of kind of like shrieking religious hysterics who are definitely, like, they're all fired up over the satanic panic of the 1980s. And so they have like pickets and they're protesting this movie, whatever the movie is that's being directed by Elizabeth Debicki's character. But I feel like this movie either needed to be shocking enough and provocative enough where it actually would generate that kind of controversy with, like, diehard Christians, or even better, if they had the courage of their convictions, make a movie that's so shocking and so controversial and so provocative that the people who basically give a positive review to each and every single A24 film, where they're basically like A24 groupies, where even those critics and pundits and talking heads and whatnot would have been inclined to say, like, A24 has gone too far, Ty West has gone too far, like, you'll never work in this town again, and at the same time still deliver a movie that's a big, massive runaway success. I don't think this movie is going to be a massive runaway success. I don't know if any big horror movie is going to be a big runaway success, unless you count A Quiet Place Day One as like a horror film as opposed to sci-fi. I have not seen it, so I cannot really specify which genre it feels more at home inside of, but Longlegs seems to be the art house horror film that's going to dominate the summer. I've heard nothing but just rave reviews about Longlegs. I mean, people losing their goddamn minds, saying that's like the best audience experience you could possibly have. Like Neon, it's not as successful as A24, but I feel like Neon is kind of like A24 light, or it's like the little brother to A24 that A24 kind of periodically beats up on. But I think when it comes to providing, the elevated horror film of the summer, I think Neon's going to win that battle. And because it's coming out in 10 days, MaXXXine better sell as many tickets as it can between now and then, because I have a feeling once Longlegs comes out, once again, I've not seen it. I feel like everybody's seen it at this point except for me. I'm seeing it on the 11th, but I think Longlegs is going to shove MaXXXine aside and win the hearts and minds of horror fanatics throughout the summer. And by the year's end, it might be Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, which is the most beloved horror film of 2024. That trailer took off like a rocket, and people got really fired up. And I'm actually working on a video now where I talk about the earlier incarnations of Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau and Werner Herzog. I'm really fired up to have that discussion. But by Christmas time, maybe Nosferatu will be like the big commercial success for true diehard horror freaks that everybody's been looking forward to. But I just think it's a good time for the horror genre, but it does seem to be struggling commercially, at least. Like, we haven't seen a movie like Five Nights at Freddy yet this year. Like, I didn't even see Five Nights at Freddy's, but that movie made shitloads of money last year, like much to the surprise of everybody involved. But it just was this runaway success. And as somebody who loves horror movies, I just would love to see one horror movie this year become a big breakout runaway sensation. But let me get into some specifics on MaXXXine and why I don't think this is going to be the one. All right, so last spoiler warning, 1, 2, 3. I don't want to hear any pissing and moaning down in the comments if I give something away. But let's get into the actual identity of the killer, who turns out to be the father of the character, MaXXXine, who's kind of a religious fundamentalist who kind of at an early age inspired his daughter to become a success and not accept a life that she does not deserve. So like all of her drive and all of her ambition comes from him, but obviously as somebody who's a bit of a religious zealot, he disapproves of her work in the adult entertainment industry and disapproves of her work on this new horror film that she's working on. And so he basically has decided to kind of pursue her, harass her, stalk her, kill everybody around her, try to convert them over to his side. And then you get this big climax at the end where he and all of his fellow zealots show up and basically tie her to a pole. And then the cops show up and it turns into this almost like a Marx Brothers movie with like unintentional laughs and the stupid shootout and that sort of thing. And it breaks the cardinal rule of any movie where your star has to be a big part of the action. Like in the final third, your star should not just be tied up watching everything happen while two very minor periphery characters are hogging the spotlight. So that was mistake number one. but just the tone got so silly. And I felt like, like the Satanic Panic of the 1980s is hardly some hot button topical issue right now, or at least the movie fails to make it seem like a hot button topical issue right now. Like, if you really want to like generate some controversy, well, then you need to tackle something that's relevant, like not a 40-year-old controversy that no one gives a fuck about anymore. And I just felt like it was so obvious and so, I guess, creatively cowardly to go for that target. And I'm not a religious zealot. I'm not defending those people or anything like that. But it just seemed like such an obvious punching bag. And also, the main the character of her father, apart from his voice in the very first scene of the movie, we don't see him in the entire film. And I feel like in a murder mystery, whether it's a serial killer movie or a thriller or a horror film or whatever, there has to be a tease at some point, like leaving a little trail of breadcrumbs where when the big reveal happens, like, got it, like the butler did it. And so it all makes sense now. When the father showed up, I was like, him? It would have been much more interesting if it were MaXXXine. It would have been much more interesting if it were Elizabeth Debicki's character. It would have been much more interesting if it were any other member of the cast, but I just felt like they chose the least interesting option for the identity of the actual killer. But my last complaint's an obvious one. If you are making a movie that has XXX in the title, if you're making a movie with murder and mayhem, if you're making a movie with cocaine and whatnot, you have to lean into the sin and the vice and the excess. Like, there's a little hint of titillation here and there, but it's like, if you removed a few seconds from this movie, it could very easily be a PG-13 movie. Like, there's only really like one big shocking moment where this killer tries to hunt down MaXXXine out in the street, and it's so over stylized and so silly and so stupid. I was like, oh, they're gonna, any second now you're gonna hear somebody say cut, and we're gonna realize she's actually working on a horror film. But I was like, no, this is an actual scene in the movie, and it's like totally in isolation, like divorced from the rest of the plot. It just seemed random and stupid and obvious and over the top, and that was really frustrating. But I know there are a lot of people out there these days that are horrified by the idea that at a certain point people take off their clothes and indulge in something called sex, and they are even more horrified when they have to confront sex in cinema. But the character MaXXXine is a goddamn porn star. Like, the film X shows some of the most kick-ass nude scenes of the last couple of years, and all those actresses just fucking went for it, and it was fantastic. And Mia Goth, she's been doing amazing nude scenes for the last 10 years. I mean, like, what was it, Infinity Pool, which she did, was it last year with Brandon Cronenberg? That movie, kind of a mixed bag, but at times was intensely erotic. And I just feel like if you're lucky enough to have an actress that's as ballsy and courageous and fearless as Mia Goth, lean into those qualities that you already showed us in X that were obviously totally missing from Pearl. And if you're going to market the film as a slasher film, or at least put that in the official kind of publicity materials, well, then you need to pump up the fucking volume, because people who are horror fans have seen a lot of slasher movies. They've seen the good, the bad, and everything in between, and they will be patient as long as you deliver the goods eventually. But give us some goddamn gore. Give us some real deal kill scenes. Like, whip out a straight edge and like saw someone's fucking tongue off, or do something interesting, but like shock us. And maybe, once again, I mean, I've been watching horror films for 40 years at this point. Maybe I'm a little desensitized, as my college sweetheart used to say, "You're so desensitized." I'm like, guilty, but I fucking love this shit. So I'm waiting for the horror experience like a drug to go right into my vein and give me what I crave. And if you're looking for a real deal slasher film, MaXXXine absolutely, chickens out on that front, which is frustrating because so much of this movie is really cool. Like I said, the photography, the look, the style, the atmosphere, the cast. It's they had so many good ingredients to work with, and so much of the movie is good. And then, but if you don't, like, look at the first Friday the 13th. Like, you can laugh at it now for being a little bit dated for the early 80s, but no one can deny that when it cranks things up a notch at the end, it's like, oh my God, like, great killer reveal and great twist at the end. Like, Friday the 13th absolutely delivers, like, everything you want from a slasher movie at that time. But in 2024, you got to go above and beyond, because we've had, 50 years of slasher movies at this point. We've been conditioned to expect the unexpected, and this movie almost never provides the unexpected. And I'm just now realizing I'm coming across a little bit more negative than I intended at the outset, and I think it's only because I was very excited to see MaXXXine. I love Mia Goth as an actress. Like, she doesn't always necessarily get, like, the good fortune of being in a movie that's awesome, but I feel like she's always awesome. She makes great choices. She picks cool filmmakers. She's always doing her best to get associated with great material. And I feel like, she's rapidly accumulated a pretty goddamn kick-ass filmography. So I consider myself a Mia Goth fan and enthusiast, etc. And I think there's a very good chance for the next 5 or 10 years, she might continue to do some of the most interesting work out there of any actress. I just think MaXXXine is not one of them, but I look forward to hearing what people have to say, because I remember when Pearl came out, everybody was like ranting and raving about Pearl. I was like, well, Pearl's fine, but X was way better. I think for people who are interested in this trilogy, perhaps a debate will continue to rage for the rest of the year as to which of the 3 films is the strongest. But my money or my vote is going to X. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. But if you're looking for some recommendations that I absolutely love, that are movies from the time being captured in MaXXXine, 1985, where I feel like they just they got all the nutrition and the vitamins that a growing boy could ever need when it comes to erotic thrillers and so on and so forth, I will include links down in the description below to those videos. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you disagree with what I had to say, you will not hurt my feelings. Just let me know down in the comments below. But if you like this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.